short break.
Panelists include Jim Harris, Linda Warden, Maria Tenner, and Pat Lynch. The YWCA would like to thank our panelists and moderators, and it is our hope that the panelist discussion will help bridge the gaps in society formed by a lack of cultural understanding and awareness. There will be a question and answer session after the main discussion. Thank you.
It's immobile. I think we're just going to have to shout. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Lynn. I am really honored to have been asked by the Y staff to moderate this panel. I have to start with the disclaimer that I have absolutely no claim to being an expert in this field at all. My own connection with it has been as a physician, one of those bad guys that doesn't necessarily always respond appropriately, as I learned yesterday, and have done in my past life in the Northeast, where I am from, did some volunteer work with battered women's shelter. But I learned more yesterday. Incidentally, this is a wonderful conference, and my thanks to all of the persons who perpetrated this. It's lovely. I learned more yesterday about what domestic violence is, I think, than I have known in my collective life. So with all of that, I'm going to be in this position to just sit back and try to get things going, and I believe from observing this group there's not going to be any problem with keeping it going. The panelists have agreed that they're perfectly willing to be interrupted. In fact, I believe the statement was the mothers among us, and probably the fathers, if we have a father, are used to being interrupted. So we have a list of questions that were put together by the conference planners in attempting to pull up what they felt, and it looks like a good list to me, felt were the issues that we may in fact neglect or not be aware of that arise from cultural variation. And I think if you think back to what Elizabeth Stellis told us yesterday and emphasized a number of times in talking about the significance of remembering when we're working within this field the religious differences, the beliefs, the religious belief systems that can be at the background in any woman, an abuser or an abusee, that her response or the abuser's response or society's response may in fact be very significantly tempered by religious background. And I think we can take that same model and move it into the possibility or the probability of cultural differences among us maybe not being recognized or paid attention to in this very Anglo kind of model that we tend to use in this country to define everything. I have no illusions that we're going to be able to get at the root of all things today, but I think it would be very interesting, and the panelists, I have all had a chance to look at and think some about these questions, to begin to ask some of the hard things about what happens in your culture. What does your heritage bring into this whole question of abuse and of domestic violence that we, if we're putting together a program over time for the year 2001 to try to make things better, what do we need to know from the different cultures as we plan strategies for addressing this problem? I'm going to ask, before we really get rolling, if there is anything that any of the four of you would like to add to what we know about you. Is there anything that any of you feels would help define where you reside. For example, what is your interest, particularly in domestic violence? Maria, you told me earlier a little bit about how you think about it and what your interest is.
Primarily, I think that the reason I became interested in it was because my stepdaughter married into a domestic relationship. And I couldn't understand, having come from a family that I didn't experience what I considered to be abuse or child abuse. Looking back on it now, I guess it was child abuse. But she married into a situation where her husband used to beat her and thought it was okay, and she thought it was okay too, and for many years I did not know this was going on. And when it finally came to light and I realized what was happening to her, I became interested in why she chose this, because I felt that she had a choice. And so after a lot of talks and a lot of study and time, and her not understanding my position and me not understanding hers, I decided that it was up to me to learn more about domestic abuse. And so I haven't really made it my life study, you might say, but I read a lot about it. I talk to a lot of people. A lot of women who've been in this kind of situation have had friends and relatives. And I still don't claim to understand why women get into this kind of situation, because I don't feel that I ever would have been the type of person to become a victim. But I think it's interesting that many women do choose this, and I do think it's a choice, either consciously or unconsciously, that women at some point in their life may, or men, to become victims. And so this is the reason why I'm involved in this as much as I am. I probably should be more, but it's kind of a question that I have that I would like answered.
Thank you. Great. Jim, you work in, and I have not heard, and I was not here for the sessions this morning, any mention to date of abuse of the elderly, and you're involved primarily, as I understand it, with RSVP. Now, is this something that you can bring to us from the standpoint of someone who works largely with the elderly? Is this a problem that you see in your work?
I don't work directly in direct service delivery. Elderly abuse is a problem. It's not a motivating factor for my being here today, if that's what you're asking.
All right. What is your motivating factor for being here today?
I feel that there are some things going on in our society, and I think it becomes important to have this type of dialogue where we get to hear voices of people that this community probably does not hear. That's the primary thing that motivated me to come here. I think the issue of domestic violence is a very serious issue. And if there's anything that I could say or an experience that I could bring that would have to alleviate this situation, then I felt it incumbent upon me to do that. While you have me talking, I'm very interested in knowing who I am talking to. Are most of you from Montana? How many people are from outside of Montana? Washington, are you from the Northwest? I'll shut up.
Don't shut up. You're doing fine. Who's interviewing whom?
Right.
Linda?
It's hard to say. Right now, I'm an employee of the University of Montana in financial aid, but I come from a place that probably a lot of you are not aware of. It's called the Blackfeet Indian Reservation here in the state of Montana. And prior to coming to the university, I worked in law enforcement extensively with abuse and neglect issues that prompted me to expand that into domestic violence kinds of things. I feel that domestic violence goes hand in hand with child abuse and neglect in one form or another. Also, trying to educate the Native American people, women, that they are in domestic violence situations is just beginning to blossom on a lot of the reservations, especially ours. We do now have a home that women are able to go to, and that was just newly erected. It's about a year old. But I'm back at the university to obtain my degree and probably go back to the reservation and get back into the main line of working with what I left.
Thank you, Linda. Pat?
Well, I'm sitting here wondering why I'm sitting here. I see a lot of people out there who would be much more apt to be eloquent in this situation. I'm feeling very humbled by being the Caucasian representative on this panel. I see myself as more of a learner in this situation than a deliverer of information. My involvement with domestic abuse issues comes from my being a program coordinator for a domestic abuse program in Ravalli County of Hamilton. I think they must have cut up names and put them in a hat, and mine came up, and I said yes before I realized how difficult this position might be. But I really am pleased to be here.
Thank you. It seems to me that a good place for us to get rolling would be perhaps to ask the question of what is your culture definition of abuse. I think each of us probably comes to this with an idea of what we, from our background, feel constitutes abuse. What is the line, for example, with children? What is the line between the necessary discipline and where does that cross over into abuse? And what is it that in the family structures within other cultures constitutes abuse that would be defined as abuse, either spousal or child abuse, within the context of the family life in a given culture? Which one of you wants to take that on?
I will.
Thank you.
And the reason is, I firmly believe that the Native American people do not have a definition of abuse. I have a grandmother that passed away here 2 years ago at 107 years of age, and I don't think we've talked these issues over with her that actually could sit and tell us what a definition of violence was, because I don't think they really understood the domestic violence issue. I think what they experienced, they thought was normal.
So, am I hearing you say that there is violence that doesn't get labeled violence?
It wasn't labeled. I don't think it has been labeled until the issue of domestic violence has come into play and it's been given a name, a title, and a definition. Then people are able to relate to what you are saying. But prior to that, I don't believe that their idea of abuse was if a person neglected their family issues, material kinds of things, non-material kinds of things, didn't pay attention to the children. They don't view things materialistically. It's kind of...
You know, whereas I can appreciate the sensitivity of that question, I have a problem with it. Apart from Native Americans, we live in a society of immigrants, and African Americans are not just first and second generation Americans. The point being that I don't know that there's one brand of Black American and we can say that there's one definition in Black America for abuse. I think that for the most part, African Americans have been assimilated into this culture. And for me to sit here and say that abuse in African American cultures, I think that would be misleading. I think it's relative to the community. I think it's relative to the value systems of that particular set of African Americans. think it's relative to those experiences of those people who practitioners, clinicians, or whoever would be dealing with. I think the point I'm making is that it would be an individual type of situation, an individual type of definition, and it would be a relative one, and I just couldn't feel comfortable saying that abuse for African Americans is da, da, da.
All right, thank you. Let's see if Marie has a different viewpoint on that, or the same. Maybe we're beating a dead horse. Maybe this is a non-thing. That there is a cultural difference in definition. What do you think?
Well, probably more like the Native Americans. The Spanish community has more, I don't think that it was considered, or child abuse was considered abuse. It was more a form of discipline. I think maybe abuse would be categorized more as a man that didn't support his family and wasn't within the family unit. Say he left to go elsewhere, left the family. That would be considered abuse. Also, sexual abuse would be a taboo thing in the Spanish culture. As far as physical, I think they could beat their kids to a pulp and it was not considered abuse. Or their wives, if they felt their wives deserved it for whatever reason. So it was not growing up and looking back on my youth. There was child abuse in my family. It was if we did something wrong, my dad got out the belt and let us know who was boss. But he never thought, after we had grown up and talked about it, he never considered it abuse. And I didn't either at the time. Looking back on it now, I realize that it was. But it was something that no one thought about it as abuse.
Do you perceive that this is changing? I mean, you're looking back now and identifying this event as being abusive by today's definition. Do you see that your culture is also moving away from that as being an accepted?
Well, I think with telecommunications and women becoming more educated, more well-traveled, and extending from their family unit and from their cultural environments, I think that people have begun to realize that this is not okay. And so all of these factors come into the picture, and women are starting to say, I do have a choice, and this is not okay. And as a result, they're educating their daughters and their sons, and so on, and also the husbands and fathers.
May I add something here? You know, to me, I think the question is not one of a definition of abuse. I think there's some other issues or some other things that come into play. It's a matter of economics. It's a matter of having access. It's a matter of information. It's a matter of knowing what your options are in situations. So I don't think any culture would just openly accept beating somebody. I think lots of those behaviors are unacceptable. It comes to the point of what are my options here, though? Where can I go? What resources are available to me? Do I have any? It almost boils down to a thing of empowerment in my mind.
Okay, if you then, Jim, were the god of curing this ill, and you were advising us. And we came to you for a consultation in terms of advice as to how, for the year 2001, we would move to intervene. What, from your viewpoint, would be the things that we need to know specific to, and maybe you're going to tell me nothing specific to the black culture, what would be the things that we should take with us, the tools, to help with the resources, to help provide the options?
First of all, this is a good step right here. Don't get me wrong. I think this is an excellent step right here just to include people of color, to include a diversity of opinion, to get a diversity of views. The other thing is to just become simply aware of what's happening in the world around us, what's happening with African Americans, where are they economically, what's happening educationally with them, what's happening with African American families in general in terms of economics, education, and those types of things. I think those become important factors. We could sit here and discuss definitions and that type of thing, but my point is that people don't have access to resources, if they don't know how to identify options, then these other discussions become almost theoretical. Am I still on the God throne?
But I just want to get into like a stereotypical response. If you listen to things like rap music and things like that, there's a general disrespect for women all through it. And I'm not saying you're not correct. I'm just saying there's a little bit of denial there that there is this stuff going on.
Do all African Americans listen to rap music?
Right. So what I'm saying is there's this thing, if you see a drunk Native American, you say there's a drunken Indian. But if you see a white guy, you don't say there's a drunken German fellow. Right. So I can see what you're saying, though. But stereotypically, I guess, what conjures up in my mind is that whole confusion about it is if that's being broadcast in the media through the entertainment, all this disrespect for women. And on one video, there was a homicide of a prostitute, and this guy's car, he says, "Why'd you get blood all over my car?" And so here's this black rap group doing it, so then it conjures up the thing that black men don't respect women.
But I think that those kind of stereotypes are going to change with education. That's the only way we're going to be able to change those kinds of attitudes, those kinds of thoughts, and is to broaden the education to each and every person around. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of dysfunctional people that would give anything to learn just what domestic violence is, or to even know that they're a victim of it. It's a person's choice, but I also think that as a community person, it's our responsibility to educate people, the lay people that are in the community, so that they learn that there are other ways, and they have a choice of not to turn the TV on and listen to that.
Could I just respond to that, too? I think the other thing that says, too, is that we have to take some individual responsibility to address some of those things. I don't think the issue is one of African American culture. I think it's one of American culture, and it's a racial issue. I think the media has to be taken to task. For example, anytime we think of the drug culture, what's the first thing that flashes on the news? A black person in handcuffs when 80% of drug users are white suburban males. So I don't know that, I think it's important to be sensitive to different viewpoints. I think it comes to a point where we can become overly sensitive. Oh, he's black, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I think we have to reach a balance there, and we have to identify what is the real issue here, what's the real thing to be dealt with here. And again, I want to underscore, I think sensitivity is very important, but I think the importance lies in us being eager to include diverse viewpoints and not willing to reinforce, whether by design or default, a lot of the stereotypes that are perpetuated.
I would just say that I would rather listen to rap music than listen to Andy
So in as much that rather than a multicultural panel per se, that we need a presentation and a discussion of racism in our work. what are what do we, especially the dominant white culture, need to learn about our own races? And that's part of why I want to hear from you all, because I don't learn about my racism, because I don't have to learn about it until you speak to me and tell me what it is that I'm doing that's racist. And that's more what I would like to hear about, because there isn't, unless I open myself to hear that, I can go the rest of my life and never find that out, because I'm in the dominant culture. I have to be willing to hear you all tell me, what is it I'm doing in my work that's clearly racist? A question I have is that I know in some of our shelters in Seattle, there's a discussion that goes on around Caucasian white staff determining for shelter residents the kinds of ways they can interact with their children when the shelter residents are people of color. How do we separate, let's say, the no-hitting agreement in shelters when in fact that decision has come from a dominant white staff to people of color who are there? I mean, maybe you could comment on that. I mean, that's to me where the issue starts to hit, is when our systems are still being run by the dominant white culture, and we don't even know how racist we are.
And the point that I'm trying to make, it becomes incumbent upon those individuals who are being affected, that those people that you're serving might have a different value system altogether from mine. It becomes incumbent upon whoever's experiencing that racism to speak out, and it becomes incumbent upon you to have your ears open to listen and to accept that and to apply that. I think the problem, what I can tell you, what bothers me and where I think the failing is that you look for one brand. There's one model of black person. They all run on the same gas. They all go at the same speed. And that's simply not the case.
I think that's probably particularly true with the one that I run up against in Montana is with the Indian people, because I've been places and we've been told, well, you can't look them in the eye because they don't like to be looked in the eye, and this and that, and they don't speak up. They don't tell us what's bothering them, and we do need to know more. But what I do know is that there's lots of different Indian people. They're not all Blackfeet, they're not all Kootenai, whatever, there's a bunch, and it is hard. We don't know quite how to deal with that.
That's why I think that if a shelter is going to operate, then they need to educate themselves in the kind of people they're dealing with. But you also must realize that not all Indians are alike, not all blacks are alike, not all Spanish are alike, that there are varying cultural differences for the 7 tribes here in the state of Montana. Every culture has their own set of rules. And true, there's some Native Americans that don't like to be looked at when they're talked to, and that's due to respect. Because you're taught at a very young age, it's impolite to look at somebody to stare. And when you're talked to, that's a respect thing that's taught us in culture, and yet to the white society, it's kind of, that person's shady, she's not really true. And knowing those kinds of things are going to benefit your shelter and your workers. That's why education is stressed, sensitivity to those kinds of issues. And if it may sound crazy to you, go find somebody that can explain it to you.
Right. Where do we go for that kind of, this is
And
great
that's
because
why I believe that if you're going to run shelters, you need to network with communities, you need to network with people, so that you have that kind of diversity in your shelters, so that if a black person comes in, you have some idea of the changes. If a Native American comes in, or if a Spanish comes in, or if an Oriental person comes in, that your techniques in bringing out why they're there is going to be a lot more sensitive to their needs than it is to your needs. And I firmly believe that before a person can come in and pull those issues out of somebody, they have to have dealt with their own issues of abuse in any shape or form.
Since we're running off at the mouth on this end, You know, the issue of domestic violence, in my mind, is a sub-issue of something that's greater. And I think the question came from over there was, what do you do? I think you deal with the greater issue. Your specific dealings might be with domestic violence, but the greater issues are issues of social justice. Those are the issues that will, I think, alleviate some of those other things to bring in some of those people who you will be serving some outreach to some of those other voices to get their input in situations, and that's not only at the level of dealing with domestic violence, but that's in society as a whole. I sense from this woman's comment here that there's some difficulty in getting those voices involved in the decision making, and that's because we live in a society where some African American people have become hopeless, have been locked out, and was at a conference here a couple of weeks ago, a 2020 conference, planning for the future growth in this community, and I kept hearing the word diversity. This is a diverse community, and perhaps I'm looking out of the wrong colored glasses. But, you know, we see what we want to see, and we accept the realities that we want to accept, but the reality is that this is not a society that is as inclusive as we want to make it, as we want to make believe that it is, and we have to deal with a greater issue. The issue is not just one of domestic violence and being culturally sensitive. To me, I sum it up as a greater issue of injustice in the society, and if we really look at the literature and we really look at the facts, things are not getting any better. They're getting worse. There's becoming increased alienation. I've just finished a book, Common Destiny, Blacks in the American Society, and most of the indicators show that African Americans are worse off now than they were 40 years ago. So it's a greater issue that we have to deal with, and these sub-issues will not be resolved. We will do Band-Aid types of things, but the greater issues will not be resolved until the larger issue itself is addressed.
Is this specific to the black community, or do you see this as a general? I'm not going to ask you, Jim. I'm going to ask the other folks. As a problem would you buy the same thing, Maria, in terms of the Hispanic culture, that we can't focus on this issue without looking at the bigger picture of racism, cultural misunderstanding, a much broader view? Does that resonate with you?
I think prejudice starts with the individual, and sometimes people do not consider themselves to be prejudiced. But the question is, would you think it was okay if your daughter or son brought home a black person to marry, or adopted a black child or a Hispanic child or Indian child? And how would you really feel about that? I mean, would you have qualms about it, or in your mind think that's okay? And the problem is that I know with my husband, he never considered himself to be prejudiced, but he always said, I would never want my daughter to marry a black man. And so now he's changed his mind.
You mean about whether he's prejudiced or not?
Well, yeah, I think so. He never said he was prejudiced because he was willing to marry a Mexican Spanish woman, but he drew a line. And so, unfortunately or fortunately, he married a woman who's very very open, and I talked to him and I said, no, my children will be free to marry who they want, and if they want to marry a black person or whatever, that will be their choice. And my children are very, very independent, and my daughter informed him that yes, if she chose to marry a black man, that's what she was going to bring home. And so since then, he has changed his mind. But I think it starts with who you want your neighbors to be, or your family members. And people that feel strongly about this need to talk about it to their other family members, or their neighbors, or their in the workplace, and say, look, this is my feeling, and why do you feel the way you do? Why do you think that you are better or above a person of color, or a person of another race? I mean, what makes you so good? And this is a conversation I have had with different people at different times. Another thing that I noticed is, having been raised in an Anglo community, being a Spanish, Mexican, Hispanic person, I found that as people got to know me, I became whiter to them. I have had very good friends sitting next to me talking about, I would never want a Mexican for a neighbor. I'm sitting there, but they didn't perceive me. Say After a while, I was no longer Mexican or Spanish. I was equal to them. So this is what we need to do, is maybe get to know these people one-on-one instead of keeping a distance.
Or we need to clone Maria and send her out to the various shelters to challenge people so they can be aware of their racism. Pat, you've been awfully quiet.
Now I want to say something. I have to agree with Jim. It's not a simple solution to start at this point and say we're going to resolve the issues around domestic violence as it relates to ethnic, religious, race, gender, all those kinds of things. But I think in the context of this conference, that it's something that a lot of us would like to talk about in terms of how we can then, as individuals, as members of coalitions, as members of community groups, what can we do to make sure that our movement includes the needs and the cultural backgrounds of the people that we may or may not come in contact with. And I say those things from the perspective of a person who's lived in Montana all their lives and had very limited experience with other cultures. Now, I don't often come into contact with people of other cultures, but doing the kind of work that we do, I think it's absolutely essential that we are informed about how other people think about the issues that we are addressing. And that was my hope today, was that I would get some input from that and some sharing.
Well, I think I'm hearing all of you say education, and Linda said it in just that many words, is a really important part of this. How can we structure, put together a method for allowing this to happen, forcing this to happen in our work in the shelters, to become knowledgeable about these variations when we come across them? And how do we do that?
I think that starts with talking. I don't think you're going to get anywhere if you can't sit down at a table and discuss the issues at hand and invite the people from different cultures to set in on what you're doing. Once you do that, you start your networking process, and believe me, it'll move along really quick. Because I believe there's just as many cultures out there that are willing or wanting to assist. They have to be asked. And they have got to be made to feel welcome. That whatever or wherever they come from, that their input is important and is appreciated. I think once we get over those steps, things are going to be a lot easier.
And might I add, it has to be a real discussion. It can't be a superficial discussion. If the issue is racism, then talk racism. So often they're just superficial types of discussions. They don't focus in and deal with what the real issues are. What's the real problem we're dealing with here? If the problems are apples with worms in it, then talk apples with worms in it. Don't beat around the bush. And we see that happening too much in the political arena. And if we are serious about addressing this problem and doing it in an inclusive manner, then we have to be serious about focusing in on what the real situation is and talking openly, just like Linda said. We're all sitting down, we all have opinions, but let's make sure we know what it is we're talking about. Let's make sure that there's a clearly defined subject.
I wanted to comment when we say socioeconomic, I think that is our basis for what we're talking about here. I think it's something we need to get to as far as there are a lot of women, particularly older women and women, single mothers with children who fall into a socioeconomic level that takes away their power.
Does any of you want to respond to that? We all agree.
Right.
I
I sent,
have just one question for, is it Marie?
Maria.
Maria. You talked a little bit, and this is kind of off the subject where we are now, but you talked a little bit about abuse in your culture, and I was wondering if you were all familiar with something I heard called machismo, where men, particularly in Hispanic culture, which is the fastest growing culture in the United States, is that?
I believe so. I wouldn't say that for that.
Where the men, they get more
Mhm.
power in the community from their friends, and with the more women they impregnate and leave.
The macho word, I think, started, I mean, it's got Latin roots. It means being manly, being a man, and it has to do with control. It has to do with power. And this is something I see a lot within the older generation, the young men my age. It's something that's still prevalent. However, I see a lot of the younger girls starting to speak out and learning to say no, learning that it is not okay to be macho. In fact, putting young men down for being macho. It's not macho to be macho anymore. And that's good. But you're right, and it did have to do with sexual control, or just if they couldn't control them any other way, they would be the domestic physical abuse, or maybe girlfriends. They started. It was something power struggle, you might say. You teach your girlfriend how to be a good wife by letting her know who's the boss, and I've seen that with cousins and that kind of thing, where the abuse started early in the relationship, and it was okay with the girls because everybody was doing it. It was part of the system that they were accustomed to.
But you feel that that's changing now?
I do, yes. And like I said, with the education and with women knowing that they do have choices, that they don't have to put up with that. And that does have to do with maybe the mothers having been victims of abuse and learning now that they do have a right to choose, that they don't have to stay in a family situation where the man is the lord and master and the woman has to be the slave that does whatever he says, or fear for their life, for their children's life. And it's something that I think is changing.
I'd just like to point out that it was really easy for Caucasian Americans to understand the concept of machismo because it was so prevalent in our own culture. And I wonder if it's changing in the United States. I'm not sure in Caucasian culture in the United States. I'm not sure that it is. I see things like Rambo, and I see the reaction to the Gulf War, and I think that we're in a sort of a backswing at least with the dominant culture and what it's putting across.
Just walk down the halls of a high school someplace.
Yeah, it's a male patriarchal male privilege system, and it's filtered a little differently through, but it's certainly not isolated in the Hispanic community.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess my question is, being from Canada, I guess our concern is more with having services being provided to new immigrants. I think a lot of the discussion has been concentrated on second generation. My concern, I'm working on a project for our shelter, is for new immigrants, new refugees who are coming into the country, who are coming, I myself being a Latina, I know that a lot of people from El Salvador, for example, will come with a generic view of violence because there's violence is so prevalent in their society that, going out to the street and seeing people being yelled all day, the fact that you go home and they beat you up is nothing compared to being scared for your family, for take your husband, take your kids. So I guess, and I think often we're not sensitive as workers of shelters of those issues, that if a woman who is recently coming from El Salvador and we say, well, you go and get a court order, get a restriction order, that's not going to go very well, and that woman probably is going to leave immediately because their notion of authority, of course, is totally different to ours. And I guess my concern in coming here, I was hoping to see from my own purpose, I guess, more, not so much of the second generation, but the new immigrants, the women who is isolated, who doesn't know how to speak English, the woman who has come from a culture that is oppressive and maintains itself in an oppressive culture. I guess that's where I wanted some answers from the panel. As workers, obviously get more informed and whatnot, but what are some of the issues that we're dealing with from this different perspective?
I think that's a very important question, and I'm going to ask if anyone on the panel would care to offer some suggestions. I think we hadn't talked at all about that. Does any of you have some feeling for this first generation
I
from?
do. Again, I have to go back to education. I firmly believe that before you can service those kinds of people, your staff as well as yourself must know where they come from, how they dealt with it, and what you're going to offer them. Is it adequate? Is it fulfilling their needs? Obviously, you can't take a lady that has watched killing day in and day out and take her to a courtroom and say that you're going to get a restraining order. You have to educate yourself in ways and means of getting to that person. And again, it goes back to education. Learning culturally where those people come from, what they dealt with, and how are you going to offset that. And right now, I don't know. It seems almost hopeless. They've seen so much violence, and we're just coming in on a domestic violence level. It really does take massive education, I believe. I think it takes a lot of work psychologically to, I don't know if unprogram that person is the right word, but somehow you've got to pull that kind of what they're used to down to a level where we're at. And we only are able to do that through education, of knowing where that person comes from, what they came from, and how do we deal with it. Obviously, you can't put a woman in a shelter that's come out of a situation like that knows that to get even with somebody hitting their child is to pick up a broom and knock the other person in the head. So I think those are really critical areas that have to be looked at, especially in Canada, if that's how many people you're having come in.
Yes.
I believe that we need to realize that each and every one of us is a different culture, and that when we address the women and children who come to us, we need to take that person as a culture in their own. How were you raised? What happened to you? A history of that person and the abuse and what took place in them, and what are your values? What's important to you? What oppression have you suffered through? All the things that make that person a component of who they are, rather than looking at this person as we have so many words for stereotyping people. Oh, that person's Native, and this person's black, and that person's Hispanic, and this person's white, and we're not thinking that this is
a person that was raised a certain way, so we need to address a certain way that that person was raised, whether they were abused when they were children or had certain religious beliefs, or had certain schooling. Everything that comprises that person's being is what needs to be important to us in order to decide what resources and what is best for that person to send them out to get the help that they need to get.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap it up. Thank you. Unless there is another pressing question, I see that our time is getting...
We're from the Missoula shelter here, and one thing that I've noticed that has been a problem for us working with Native American women who come to the shelter is that we service 7 counties radius around the shelter here in Missoula. And oftentimes we get women who are coming from Downey or several different other reservations around Montana, and they're leaving a good support system there and coming to a place where they don't know very many people. We're all strangers, and we oftentimes call Native American services and try to hook them up with them. But the problems that I see is that they're leaving their entire support system to come to us. They're looking at it when they talk about their abuser that they're almost betraying their husband and the whole culture. Because they're afraid we're looking at it as not just a man who's beating her, but who's a Native American man. And I think they have that fear in revealing that. And like it will be a backlash on their culture. And another thing is, with the wide range of family and friends that they have, sometimes they do run into people here in Missoula who belong to their husband's tribe and will tell the husband where they are, and it just becomes very jumbled. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on how to deal with the women that are coming, leaving their whole support system and are in danger here in Missoula from seeing people from their husband's tribe.
Again, I have to go back to the word network. No, network. That's the second
Just
word.
2 words.
And I'll tell you why. In order for the Native American people to benefit from the services, then I feel that your shelter needs to network with Native American people that have education about domestic violence and also about their cultural value system, so that when you do have a family that comes in, or a lady or a man, now you got to remember men are out there too that are being abused by Native American women. But you need to network. You need to draw in the people that have that expertise, that are able to assist you in whatever you're going to do. And it's like creating a foster family.
Some problems that we've run into, for example, is like our main resource would be Native American Services or the Native American Studies program at the university. Sometimes we will call them. And some of these women are really scared to contact them because a relative of their husband works for that service.
But if you are professional, that should not hinder you from coming in and assisting a person that is in need of services.
And I believe that they are professional. I think it's still
Right.
is a giant fear of the woman to overcome.
But I think those issues that you just talked about are not that important. What I feel you need to do is network with the Native American women or men that's in this community that have knowledge of that, and pull them to your side so that when you do have a family that comes in, at least we have some idea, someone to relate to. Those people have someone to relate to. And it's going to make a difference. Believe me, it will. If you don't, then what you're going to feel is frustration because you're not providing the services that you want to because this person is not picking up on it.
Thank you. We are over time. Can we have a hand for our panel?